To help you work safely in confined spaces, your employer complies with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's permit-required confined spaces regulation. This program covers your employer's confined space program. You'll learn about identifying characteristics and space hazards, atmospheric testing, other hazard controls, the confined space permit, personal protective equipment, communication, rescue equipment, team responsibilities, and contractors. First, you control hazards. Then you continuously monitor the confined space to make sure the hazards remain controlled. Before work begins, be sure that all hazards are controlled. But first, you must know what hazards to look for. Confined spaces can be tanks, vessels, silos, storage bins, hoppers, vaults, pits, or pipelines. However, all of them have some common features. First, openings to enter and exit are limited. Second, they are big enough for a person to fit inside, but not designed for routine continuous use by people. Your employer can document that some confined spaces pose no hazards and have no potential to develop hazards. These are considered non-permit confined spaces. Other confined spaces, however, contain hazards and require a permit to enter. These spaces should be secured with barriers and marked with warning signs. A confined space with any of the following hazards is a permit-required space. A hazardous atmosphere. The air inside the space is or could become dangerous. A potential to engulf employees. Small particles or liquids in the space could bury or drown an entrant. A configuration that could trap an employee. Maybe the floor slopes or walls converge inwardly. The space has machinery that might start up unexpectedly. Electricity or extreme heat or cold. Atmospheric hazard causes more deaths and injuries than any other confined space hazard. Atmospheric hazard usually means too little or too much oxygen. If there is too little oxygen, less than 19.5%, people get disoriented and may be too confused or weak to get back out of the space. Too much oxygen, more than 23.5%, increases the fire and explosion hazard. A hazardous atmosphere can also mean the space contains unsafe amounts of flammable gas, vapor, mist, or dust, or that it has harmful levels of a hazardous substance. Atmospheric testing is a major part of every confined space program. The atmosphere inside a confined space is tested by inserting monitor probes or hoses into the space before anyone enters. The first test measures oxygen level. Then air is checked for combustible gases and vapors. And finally, the space is checked for toxic gases and vapors that could cause acute or chronic illness. Gas tests are made from the top to the bottom of the space, since heavier gases collect at the bottom while lighter vapors concentrate at the top. Since employees or their representatives can watch testing and continuous monitoring, more people ensure that proper results determine hazard controls for the space. For example, special ventilating equipment may be brought in, or the space may be purged with an inert gas like nitrogen to clear out flammable vapors. Nitrogen purging, however, leaves another hazard, an oxygen-deficient atmosphere that must be controlled by providing breathable air. An engulfment hazard is a confined space such as a tank filled with milk, or a bin of grain, or other finely divided particles. Engulfment hazards usually are controlled by emptying or stopping material flow before people enter. Fall protection and other system safeguards like isolation may also be required. Sometimes the shape makes a space dangerous. Maybe the floor slopes or the edges overhang, making it difficult to get out quickly. Spaces like this might need internal changes, such as building a temporary floor that's strong enough to hold everybody, including rescuers, without moving. Other hazards making a confined space hazardous are electricity, machinery. Hazard controls might include locking out or tagging out electrical and mechanical equipment, blanking and blinding piping, pumping cool air in a hot space. Hazards in confined spaces must be eliminated or controlled before anyone can enter. That means you may not place any part of your body across the opening of a permit space until conditions of the permit are met. If you break the plane of the opening, you are entering the space. Before you work in a confined space, you'll have to read and understand the confined space entry permit. An entry permit is a form encouraging orderly planning and providing written authorization for work in any permit-required confined space. The entry permit identifies the space, the scope of the work, and when it will be done. It lists the names of all team members, their duties and required equipment. Sometimes when space hazards call for special equipment, such as non-sparking tools, they are listed on the permit. Especially in flammable spaces, intrinsically safe lighting, marked with the FM approval logo, may be required. If falls are a possibility, or if special gear is needed to rescue someone who gets into trouble, safety equipment listed on the permit must be ready for use. The permit shows atmospheric testing results and measures used to control hazards before entry and throughout work. Every member of the confined space team checks the entry permit to learn the hazards they face and planned control. In many cases, people who enter a confined space will need to wear personal protective equipment, called PPE. The entry permit shows the exact kind of gear needed. Some of it will be simple things like gloves, hard hats, and safety shoes. Some will be complex, like specific kinds of respirators. People entering some spaces may need to wear an air supply respirator or a self-contained breathing apparatus. Air purifying respirators are useless in oxygen-deficient atmosphere because they don't supply oxygen. But if filtering impurities will control a confined space hazard, you may use special respirator cartridges. One of the problems with confined space work is staying in touch with people outside. The entry permit tells entrants how to communicate with people outside. Sometimes it's by talking, like with a radio, or by a system of signals. Many employers require people in confined spaces to wear full body harnesses. This equipment can make it easier to remove a fallen entrant from the confined space. Because getting out of a confined space fast is so important, learning about problems quickly is critical. The entry permit also lists rescue procedures and equipment. It shows who will perform rescues and how to contact them. It describes the kind of retrieval system that is used to pull out a person who needs to be rescued. For example, in vertical entries deeper than 5 feet, a mechanical hoisting device must be installed to lift out a person who gets into trouble. All rescue equipment is listed. Sometimes the permit lists other safety measures or special permits. An example would be a hot work permit for welding or grinding inside the confined space.